In February 1945, three world leaders came together in the historic Yalta Conference held on the Crimean Peninsula. These leaders were Winston Churchill from the United Kingdom, Franklin D. Roosevelt from the United States, and Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union. Please subscribe to the channel so we can continue. Please, their mission was to discuss and deliberate on the reorganization and restoration of war-torn Europe after the anticipated defeat of Nazi Germany. The setting. Against the backdrop of war, the serene surroundings of Levadia Palace provided a striking contrast to the harsh reality that Europe faced. The location was symbolic of the crossroads at which the world stood and emphasized the gravity of the discussions to take place. The Big Three, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, known as the Big Three, had different visions of post-war Europe impacted by their ideological beliefs. Their negotiations would shape international relations for decades. Tensions and alliances. Even though united in their fight against Nazi Germany, the leaders found themselves on different sides of the ideological spectrum, with capitalism on one end and communism on the other. The context. The conference was set against the progressing Soviet armies moving into Poland and Eastern Europe and the Battle of Berlin nearing its climax. The high stakes were clear. Opening proceedings. As the leaders convened for the first time, there was a palpable air of cautious optimism. Initial greetings masked the undercurrents of tension still to unfold. Reparations debate. The topic of German reparations was contentious. The Soviet Union demanded substantial reparations to rebuild its devastated infrastructure, while the Western Allies urged caution. Polish borders. The issue of Poland's borders consumed much negotiation time. The leaders struggled to balance Soviet security concerns with the Western vision of an independent Poland. United Nations formation. An important outcome was the agreement to establish the United Nations, a global organization to prevent future conflicts. The leaders saw it as a beacon of peace and cooperation. Military occupation zones. Germany was to be divided into zones of occupation, each controlled by one of the Allies. It was pivotal for future governance and demilitarization of Germany. Displaced persons. The conference addressed the issue of millions of displaced persons and refugees, a burgeoning humanitarian crisis needing urgent solutions. Spheres of influence. Discussions on spheres of influence in Europe were crucial, as they foreshadowed the control each power would exert in the post-war landscape. Roosevelt's health. A somber undercurrent at Yalta was Roosevelt's declining health. His early death 2 months later added urgency to the proceedings. Stalin's strategic gains. Joseph Stalin skillfully negotiated gains for the Soviet Union, ensuring its influence in Eastern Europe and positioning himself as a formidable force in post-war diplomacy. Atomic secrets. Although not overtly discussed, the existence and potential use of atomic weapons were part of strategic considerations, especially for the United States. Critical decisions. Each decision made at Yalta carried weighty implications, none more so than the strategic placement of troops and allocation of resources in Europe. Plan for Japan. With Europe nearly resolved, attentions also turned to the Pacific, dictating the terms for post-war Asia. Suspicion and surveillance. Despite open dialogues, each leader surrounded themselves with advisors, indicating a mutual suspicion and need for strategic advantage. Alliance fragility. Despite a show of unity, fragile alliances revealed underlying fractures, which future events would test. The press influence. Media coverage and communication of the conference outcomes played key roles in shaping public perception and trust toward the participating nations. Humanitarian aid. Future joint efforts to supply humanitarian aid showed the leaders' attempt to curb the dire state of war-torn regions. Cultural exchange. The cultural exchange was of mutual benefit, intended to foster better relations despite political differences. Language barriers. communication, given the diverse languages and translations required, affected the pace and interpretations of the discussions. Public reaction. The world watched closely as the conference concluded, with reception varying as the implications became clearer in the months to follow. Photographic memory. Iconic images from Yalta capture a moment in time where destinies were reshaped, now immortalized in history books. Roosevelt's successors. The transition of power to Harry Truman post-conference brought new dynamics as he later grappled with the agreements made. Lasting legacies. The policies set in Yalta had enduring legacies, contributing to the shaping of the Cold War era. Critiques and praise. The conference has been subject to scrutiny and acclaim, praised for its wartime cooperation, but criticized for its naivete on Soviet intentions. Documentaries and memories. Documentaries about Yalta serve to remind of its importance and complexities, highlighting varying views